Made in Abyss was released about 5 years ago now, but it seriously feels like it's been so much longer. The show's had such a big impact on me and my perception of fiction that it feels strange to say that it's only been in my life for around 4 years now, since I didn't even start watching it for a while after it was first released. But as soon as I first started the show and binged it in a single night, it hasn't left my head for a moment. The soundtrack plays on loop constantly, the serene but disturbing surroundings haunt my dreams and my nightmares, and the journey of these characters into the depths of the world is etched into my consciousness. Made in Abyss has this effect on people. The constant craving I have to figure out every single aspect of the Abyss is what's kept me waiting for what feels like an eternity to learn more about this world. And after 2 excruciatingly long years of wait, Made in Abyss Season 2 is finally here. And I'm sure you guys are wondering, did it live up to the mountains of expectations riding on its shoulders? Well, you'll just have to stick around and find out. So first off, let's get some of the kind of dull, simple stuff out of the way, because I think if I start talking about the show too deeply, I'll start ranting and completely derail this video. So let's just start off small. So the most basic aspect of the show that I feel we can start with is the animation. So the last piece of Made in Abyss media that dropped was the Made in Abyss movie, Dawn of the Deep Soul, and I'm not sure if you guys are aware, but generally anime movies tend to have an insanely better production value than their full-length show counterparts. Look at any of the Fate movies or the Demon Slayer movies. Just generally most of the time the movies are objectively better looking than the series. And that's no different for Made in Abyss. The Made in Abyss movie is genuinely amazing to look at. It completely surpasses the show in all realms of animation in terms of the fight scenes, the character animation, or just atmospheric shots. I was a bit worried going into Season 2 that my standards would be a bit too high coming off the movie, however luckily that wasn't the case. While of course the movie is still slightly better looking in most cases, the beauty of Made in Abyss Season 2 is hard to understate. The same amazing atmospheric shots and smooth character animations make a return here, maybe with slightly less flair than before, but not enough to be disappointing in the slightest. And not gonna lie, some of the fight scenes near the end of the show went unreasonably hard. Like, I don't watch Made in Abyss for the fights, I don't know why anybody would, but they did a brilliant job with every single action scene in the show. One aspect of the animation that may be off-putting to some people is the use of more CG for some characters and creatures. But while you can still blatantly tell that it is CG you're looking at, its use is sporadic enough that it doesn't impact the experience too negatively. The one character that is done fully in CG is a strange robotic thing which doesn't really move in any semblance of a natural way, so it's not as jarring as if a mostly creature-like character was done this way. But then again, some monsters later in the show are also done in full CG, and the use of it is pretty rough there, since the creatures in Made in Abyss up until this point have all been animated gorgeously, and to see a creature that's supposed to be majestic looking kind of jank is a bit unfortunate. But the animation for the rest of the show makes it up for me at the very least. Moving on from one aspect of the production to another, it's impossible to even mention Made in Abyss without its soundtrack coming up in the conversation. And without holding the suspense over your heads for any longer, Kevin Penkin killed it once again. I had no doubts on this front at least, since ever since I heard the background music for this trailer, I was instantly sold on the soundtrack. It astounds me how this guy managed to create so many new tracks of so many different moods and tones, yet they all just fit into the show and world so perfectly. They embody everything I love about Made in Abyss, and even aside from the soundtrack's identity as part of the show, it's just full of some great tracks. As of right now, it's only been a day since episode 12 released, so we don't yet have a proper release of the soundtrack, but as soon as it comes out, I'm gonna be listening to that stuff on loop for ages. Anyways, I could rant about each individual track of this series for way too long, but I'll spare you guys the pain and just move on for now. Alright, with all of that background out of the way, let's just talk about some of the more nitty-gritty stuff to do with Made in Abyss's story and world. And spoiler warning for the first bit of Made in Abyss Season 2 and all of the previous Made in Abyss content that exists. To start out with, I'll just say this series is so close to perfection. It is the continuation of Made in Abyss. None of it feels phoned in, none of it feels unnatural. Every single piece fits perfectly into the puzzle that is this world. I won't lie, I had my doubts going into the season since when I first read through this arc in the manga, I was slightly confused and couldn't really get a proper grasp of the scenery or story, but every single issue I may have had was fixed here. The world is vast and overwhelming, but it makes sense. The story is complex and a big focus, but is delivered in an understandable and engaging way. This whole series is so much more palatable in anime form, it's so much easier to digest, and I got a lot more out of it than I first thought. I've heard some complaints that the pacing is completely ruined by the anime, but I felt that in the manga this section was handled way too fast, so I almost preferred the dramatically slower pace. The 6th layer is immediately a sizable departure from most of the other layers of the show. Aside from the 1st layer and parts of the 2nd, most of the Abyss is either fairly dark or is tinted by ethereal colors far beyond anything we've seen before, but the 6th layer right off the bat looks completely different. This season has Scorching Sun in its name for a reason. The 6th layer seems more bright than even the 1st layers, which were extremely close to the surface. Because of this, the tone in this layer is immediately slightly lighter, as the cold dreary hues of the Sea of Corpses get exchanged for the saturated pastels of the Capital of the Unreturned. If I had to just base it off of first impressions, I would say that the 5th and 4th layers won me over quicker with their ambience, but slowly but surely I came to feel the same way towards the 6th layer as many other people do. This layer is slightly similar to the 5th layer in the way that we spend a lot of our time in it in a village, rather than freely traversing around the abyss like the story flowed in the first few layers. But strangely, unlike how I felt that this distracted from the 5th layer spectacle, I think that this was a perfectly executed decision for this season. While the 5th layer is only explored in the Made in Abyss movie, where almost half of the total runtime of the movie is spent inside of the Edo front, in this season there is still an adequate amount of time spent around the 6th layer. The time we spend just around the capital of the Unreturned feels natural and well earned, and the inside of Irumuru Village is a widely different enough setting which captures your interest in addition to the rest of the 6th layer. Alright, finally, before we end, I want to devote a sizable amount of time to talk about what I feel was the greatest departure from this season compared to the rest of Made in Abyss, which in this case is the story. From the start of Made in Abyss, the story was never really the full focus of the series. It seemed to exist at some points just to carry along the plot and allow us to experience this world to the fullest. Everything was just good enough to hook us along for the ride and allow us to fall in love with the setting of the story, but this slowly began to change throughout the series. At the end of the first season when we meet Nanachi, the constant quest for adventure takes a back seat and lets Nanachi's character and motivations take center stage. And though this section of the story fits right in with the rest of the series, the highlight is shifted from just the abyss and all of its mysteries to the relationship that Nanachi and Midi had with this great pit. The choice to focus on the tragedy of what happened to Nanachi in the past and the awful decision they're forced to come to terms with is a genius one, since it not only slows the pace down and lets us really get familiar with the settings and characters, but it also impacts us emotionally, as Nanachi's story does go to some very dark and emotional places. But this was just the start for the series. On the 5th layer, the Sea of Corpses, we again get a shift of focus from the world to the experiences of Prushka, a single child who knows nothing beyond the 5th layer, and the quest of Bondru to find meaning in this great pit. This story, while it does distract a bit from the world, is probably one of my favorite things to come out of Made in Abyss, aside from the setting. The Made in Abyss movie honestly put me really close to tears. The story was devastating, and despite its short length, the movie really left its impact on me. This proved that not only did Made in Abyss have one of the best worlds in fiction, it also had the capacity to tell powerful and gripping stories of the people within this great abyss. And that is what they lean into with Made in Abyss Season 2. So, unlike before, where we solely followed our trio of main characters on their journey to the bottom of the abyss, their tale occasionally gets put on the side burner as the story of Ganja takes center stage. Ganja is a suicide squad comprised of people who don't have a home to return to, who are going out in search of a better life for themselves and those around them, all led by people known as the Three Sages. This squad of people set out to both find and explore the abyss far before the time Orth was built. They go into the abyss without knowing anything, and their story is one of the most gripping and haunting tales I've ever heard of. I'll say this really quick before I get into it, but I'm not a fan of when stories switch up the main characters or choose to shift the focus of the story onto somebody new, since I get really attached to the current characters and don't really enjoy the sudden changes. But strangely, I didn't mind this so much in this season. Maybe it's because the world of the abyss kept me engaged, or I enjoyed Ganja enough as the cast for a bit, but if you are like me and don't like sudden shifts in main characters, don't worry, their screen time is more than justified. Also, final call for those concerned, I'm gonna spoil the heck out of this series. So, Ganja's story to me is a perfect addition to Made in Abyss's world, and I'm going to explain why. One of my only consistent complaints through this season of Made in Abyss is the lack of real threat to the main characters. They don't spend as much time in the terrifying realm of the 6th layer, as the show chooses to focus more on their time in the safety of the village of Irumuru. This is a bit of a shame to me, since the Curse of the Abyss has been built up for so long as this terrible thing that makes traversing the 6th layer an awful experience. However, it never really poses a big threat to our main characters, as they spend most of their time in a village where the curse is non-existent. However, with the introduction of Ganja, this problem is cleanly fixed. Ganja, as I said, was a squad of adventurers who set out for the depths of the abyss far before Reg, Riko, and Nanachi did. However, their adventure is met with nothing but misfortune. While the Curse of the Abyss on the 6th layer doesn't have much of an impact on the main story until the very end, it does play a huge part in the tale of Ganja. After the team arrives on the 6th layer and sets up a base camp, they are soon challenged with the surprisingly hard task of finding food and water. They are aided along the way by these robots called interference units. However, even these otherworldly beings can't save Ganja for long. At the beginning, things seemed to be going well. There were a couple sources of water identified that wouldn't subject anyone to the Curse of the Abyss. However, most of them were inaccessible for some reason or the other, but luckily for them, a single spring seemed to be safe. But soon things take a turn for the worse, as many of the team grows ill for reasons that can be identified by anybody. The Three Sages, the leaders of the group, eventually realize that some sort of creature has infected the water, thus causing all of the group to get sick and infected. However, because of the curse, nothing can be done to remedy the situation, and the group is forced to drink the water that is killing them just for a chance to survive. What I love so much about this is the way that it brings tension back into the story of Made in Abyss. Riko's team has always been overpowered. They have a robot that can resist the effects of the curse and also shoot big f***off Kamehameha lasers, and they also have a holo which can see the force field of the Abyss and predict the way the creatures will act. While this is a good explanation to why the group was able to make it as far as they did, we kind of always expected them to come out of these scenarios alive, as they have the tools and capabilities to do so. But seeing Ganja, a group with none of the assets of Rico's group, aside from the robots, really drives home how dangerous this pit is, a fact that kind of gets sidelined sometimes with our main character's capabilities. Sorry for the tease, but I won't be explaining the full story of Ganja here, as the story of the series is so complex and interesting I could make an entire other video explaining it. And I probably will, so consider subscribing to see that. But the tragic fate of Ganja is genuinely one of the darkest and most emotionally damaging stories I've ever witnessed. There were numerous times that I wanted to completely look away from the proceedings, but my curiosity and lust for knowledge about the series kept me along for the ride until the bitter end. The characters in the season definitely came into their own, or at least most of the characters besides Rico, who still doesn't have much going for them besides the fact that they have a white whistle now. But everyone else was genuinely really enjoyable to watch and learn about. Of course, with the rest of Made in Abyss, there's a lot of interesting creative decisions, if you know, you know. But again, as with the rest of the series, I still think the amazing parts of the show are more than enough to bury the more questionable aspects. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I've had a lot of people telling me that Made in Abyss Season 2 was great, and while I may not have believed them initially, I think you can see how my opinion has changed. I still have the same problems with the show as I talked about in my first Made in Abyss video, but that doesn't make me unable to enjoy the show, at least most of the time. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!